The massive space station hung in the darkness like a giant metal flower. Its crystal spires reached out in all directions, each one bigger than Earth's largest cities. This was the heart of the Galactic Hegemony Council, where 12 ancient, alien races decided the fate of every world in known space. Inside the main chamber, 12 beings sat in a perfect circle. Each one looked completely different from the others. Some glowed with inner light. Others looked like living rocks or flowing water. One appeared to be made of pure energy, crackling and shifting in its containment field. These were the Council, members, representatives of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. At the center of the circle stood Speaker Vextar. His people, the Zephyrians, looked almost human, but with skin that shimmered like oil on water and eyes that held the wisdom of 10,000 years. He raised one long arm, and the chamber fell silent. "The human response has arrived," he announced. His voice carried easily through the vast space, translated instantly into the native languages of all 12 species. A holographic display materialized above them. It showed a single ship approaching their territory. The vessel was small, barely larger than a transport shuttle. Its hull was dull gray metal with simple markings that read, UES Defiance. Several council members made sounds that might have been laughter in their languages. The Hive Queen Cathara, whose body was a writhing mass of insect-like creatures that shared one mind, clicked her mandibles in amusement. "This is their answer?" she asked, her thousands of voices speaking as one. One tiny ship, the energy being called Luxanar, pulsed brighter. Perhaps they did not understand the ultimatum properly. Should we send it again? Vextar shook his head. They understood perfectly. 3 months ago, we gave them the same choice we give all new species. Submit to council authority, become our vassals, give us 60% of their resources, or face complete destruction. Every species chooses submission within days. It is the logical choice. He gestured at the display. The humans have chosen this. The ship in the image was pathetic compared to the council's might. Around the station, thousands of warships waited in perfect formation. Each one could destroy a planet. Together, they had conquered half the galaxy without ever facing real resistance. "How many humans are there?" asked Morden, one of the silicon-based architects. His voice sounded like grinding stone. "Approximately 8 billion, Vextar replied. "All living on a single world they call Earth. No colonies, no space empire, no advanced technology by our standards." 8 billion, repeated the architect. "We command trillions across thousands of star systems." Another council member, a being that looked like living crystal, chimed in. "Their ship is not even properly armed. Our sensors detect only basic defensive shields and primitive weapons." Vextar studied the approaching vessel. 3 months ago, when the council had first discovered humanity, they had seemed like any other young species. Curious, energetic, but ultimately insignificant. Their technology was centuries behind the council's least advanced member race. The ultimatum had been delivered by a council envoy ship that had appeared in Earth's solar system without warning. The message was simple and had been used successfully for over 1,000 years. Submit or die. Most species took less than a day to surrender. The smart ones took only hours. But the humans had asked for 3 months to consider. The council had been amused by this request and granted it. What harm could there be in letting a primitive species have a little more time to reach the obvious conclusion? Now, as their deadline expired, the humans had sent this single ship as their response. "What is their plan?" wondered Lix, a creature that resembled a giant jellyfish floating in a tank of liquid. "Do they think one ship can defeat our entire fleet?" "Perhaps," suggested Cathara. "They come to surrender in person. Some species prefer ceremonial submission." Vextar was not so sure. During the 3 months of waiting, Council intelligence had been monitoring Earth's communications. The humans had not acted like a species preparing to surrender. Instead, they had worked frantically on some kind of secret project. All attempts to discover what they were building had failed. The ship drew closer to the station. Its pilot made no attempt to avoid the Council's defenses or hide from their sensors. If anything, the vessel seemed to be broadcasting its location openly. "Council speaker," came a voice from the communication systems. "The human ship is requesting permission to dock." Requesting? Luxanar pulsed with what might have been confusion. They should be begging for mercy. Vexitar considered this. Every other species that had ever faced the Council's ultimatum had either surrendered immediately or fought desperately and died quickly. The humans were doing neither. Grant them permission, he decided. I want to hear what they have to say before we destroy them. The other council members nodded agreement. It would be interesting to hear the final words of a species brave enough or foolish enough to defy the council with a single ship. As the human vessel docked, Vextar found himself curious about these strange creatures. Intelligence reports described them as highly emotional and individualistic, traits that most advanced species had evolved beyond long ago. They seemed incapable of the unity and single-purpose thinking that had made the council races so powerful. "Shall we prepare the demonstration?" asked Morden. The architect was referring to their standard practice of destroying a defiant species' homeworld as an example to others. "Not yet," Vextar replied. "First, let us meet these humans face to face." The ship was so small that it could only carry a handful of people. Surely they had not come to fight. Perhaps they carried some desperate offer, some treasure or knowledge they hoped would buy mercy. But as Vextar watched the docking procedure complete, he felt something he had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. The humans' behavior did not match any pattern the council had seen before. In the docking bay, a single figure emerged from the human ship. The station's sensors identified her as female, middle-aged by human standards, wearing a simple blue uniform with rank insignia marking her as a captain. She walked calmly through the airlock, showing no fear of the alien environment around her. Most beings meeting the council for the first time were terrified or at least nervous. This human seemed relaxed, almost casual. "Council members," Vextar announced to his colleagues, "I present Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth ship, Defiance." The captain was escorted to the main chamber by floating security drones. As she entered the vast space and saw the 12 ancient beings arrayed before her, she stopped and looked around slowly. Her face showed interest, but not fear. "Impressive," she said quietly, her words translated and broadcast to all council members. Vextar leaned forward in his crystalline seat. "Captain Vasquez, you stand before the accumulated wisdom and power of 12 civilizations. Your species has 3 choices: submit to our authority, fight and be destroyed, or..." He paused. "Actually, there are only 2 choices. The third option does not exist." Captain Vasquez nodded politely. "I understand, Council Speaker. Humanity has made its decision." The council members waited. This was the moment when species either begged for mercy or made final desperate threats. Instead, Captain Vasquez smiled. "We choose option 4. Confusion rippled through the chamber. Several council members tried to speak at once. "There is no option 4, Vextar stated firmly. The human captain reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a simple data pad. "With respect, Council Speaker, humans have always been good at creating new options." She activated the device and something began to change in the chamber. At first, it was barely noticeable. Just a subtle shift in the air, a faint humming. That seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "What are you doing?" demanded Cathara. Captain Vasquez looked up at the towering alien beings around her. "Something that no other species has ever tried, Your Honors. We're sharing." The device in Captain Vasquez's hands began to glow softly. The humming sound grew stronger, and suddenly the chamber filled with something the council members had not experienced in thousands of years. Music. It was Beethoven's 9th Symphony, but somehow different. The sound seemed to come from inside their minds rather than through their ears. Each council member heard it in a way that matched their species' perception of harmony and rhythm. Cathara's thousands of bodies swayed slightly as the music reached parts of her consciousness she had forgotten existed. Luxanar's energy field flickered in patterns that matched the melody. Even the stone-like architects found their crystalline structures resonating with the sound. "What is this?" asked Vextar, though his voice lacked the authority it had carried moments before. Music, Captain Vasquez replied simply. One of humanity's oldest forms of expression. This particular piece was composed by a man named Ludwig van Beethoven about 300 years ago. He was completely deaf when he wrote it. Several council members made questioning sounds. The idea of a being creating something beautiful without being able to hear it struck them as impossible. How? Asked Lix, the jellyfish-like being. How could he create sound without hearing? He felt it, the captain explained. Humans don't just hear music, we feel it in our bodies, in our hearts, in our souls. This piece is special because it represents something we call the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. The music continued to play, but now other sounds joined it. Voices singing in harmony, but not just human voices. The translation system was somehow converting the melody into forms that each alien species could understand emotionally. Vextar tried to focus on his authority, on the power of the council, but found his attention drifting to the strange beauty of what he was experiencing. This is pleasant, he admitted reluctantly, but surely you did not come here just to play music before your execution. Captain Vasquez smiled. Actually, council speaker, music is just the beginning. As I said, we're sharing. Humanity accepts your terms. The council members exchanged glances. This was unexpected. The music stopped, leaving an odd sense of emptiness in the chamber. You surrender? Asked Morden. We comply, the captain corrected, but we'd like to offer something in return for your mercy. A complete database of human culture. Our music, our art, our stories, our poetry, our dreams. Everything that makes us who we are. She held up the device again. We thought you might enjoy learning about us before you decide our final fate. Consider it a gift from one civilization to another. Vexitar felt confused. No species had ever offered gifts to the council. Most spent their final moments cursing or pleading. Why would you do this? Because, Captain Vasquez said, we believe that understanding leads to wisdom, and wisdom leads to better choices. The captain activated her device again, and this time the chamber filled with images. They were holographic projections showing scenes from Earth. Children playing in parks, artists painting pictures, scientists working in laboratories. Ordinary. People living ordinary lives. But there was something about these images that captivated the council members. Each scene showed individuals making different choices, following different paths, expressing themselves in unique ways. Fascinating, murmured the crystal being called Hexara. They all appear to be the same species, yet they behave so differently. That's what makes us human, Captain Vasquez explained. We're all different. Every single person on Earth thinks differently, dreams differently, chooses differently. We've never achieved the unity that your species have. We've never eliminated the chaos of individual thought. Cathara's multiple voices spoke with something like confusion. But how do you accomplish anything? How do you build civilizations without unity of purpose? We argue, the captain said with a laugh. We debate. We disagree, we fight sometimes, but we also inspire each other, challenge each other, and create things that none of us could imagine alone. The images changed, showing human art throughout history, paintings that expressed individual emotions, sculptures that represented personal visions, music that came from the hearts of single composers. Each piece was different, unique, impossible to predict from the others. Luxinar pulsed thoughtfully. Your species has no central coordination? No shared consciousness? No collective decision-making? We have governments and organizations, Captain Vasquez replied, but they're made up of individuals who can choose to agree or disagree. Sometimes that makes things messy and slow. Sometimes it leads to conflict, but it also leads to creativity, innovation, and growth. She activated another function on her device, and suddenly the chamber filled with stories. Not visual displays this time, but actual narratives being transmitted directly to their consciousness. Tales of human heroes and villains, of love and loss, of triumph and failure. The council members found themselves experiencing something they had not felt in millennia: curiosity about individual perspectives. The stories were not about great civilizations or cosmic powers. They were about single people making choices that mattered to them personally. Vextar felt something stirring in his mind, something he had not experienced since his species had achieved perfect unity thousands of years ago. He was beginning to wonder what it would be like to make a choice based on personal feeling, rather than collective wisdom. These stories, he said slowly, they're about individuals who go against their society's rules. Sometimes, Captain Vasquez agreed. Humans have always celebrated those who think differently, who challenge authority, who choose their own paths even when it's difficult or dangerous. Cathara's voices carried a note of something that might have been longing. What would it be like, she wondered aloud, to have thoughts that belonged only to me? The other council members turned to look at her in shock. No member of her species had ever spoken of individual thoughts. The very concept was supposed to be impossible for a hive mind. Cathara, Vextar said carefully, are you experiencing some kind of malfunction? The hive queen's thousands of bodies shifted restlessly. I don't know. The human stories make me wonder about things I've never considered before. What if I could dream dreams that weren't shared with my entire species? What if I could have secrets, private thoughts, personal desires? Captain Vasquez watched this exchange with intense interest. That's what we call individuality, she said quietly. It's messy and sometimes painful, but it's also the source of everything beautiful we've ever created. The device in her hands pulsed again, and now the chamber filled with something new. The actual thoughts and feelings of individual humans. Not just stories about them, but their real experiences. The loneliness of a person making a difficult choice. The joy of someone creating something new. The pain of loss and the hope of new love. Luxanar's energy field began to fluctuate wildly. I can feel what it's like to be alone, he said in wonder. To have thoughts that no one else shares. To make choices that affect only myself. Morden, the architect, made a sound like grinding stone. But for the first time in his species' history, it wasn't entirely harmonious. These sensations are disturbing, but also interesting. Vextar realized that something unprecedented was happening in the council chamber. For the first time since these species had evolved beyond individual consciousness, they were experiencing what it felt like to be separate, unique beings. What are you doing to us? He demanded, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Captain, Vasquez looked up at him calmly. We're sharing the most dangerous thing humanity has ever discovered, Council Speaker. We're sharing the idea that every thinking being has the right to be different. The device continued to pulse, and the transmission grew stronger. Now it wasn't just reaching the council members in the chamber. It was spreading through the station's communication systems, touching the minds of every being on board. You need to stop this, Vextar said, but even as he spoke, he found himself questioning why he wanted it to stop. For the first time in thousands of years, he was experiencing curiosity about his own thoughts and feelings. Captain Vasquez shook her head. I'm sorry, Council Speaker, but the transmission is automatic now. And it's not just affecting this station. She gestured toward the chamber's main display, which showed her ship, the Defiance, still docked in the station's bay. My ship has been broadcasting this signal since the moment we arrived. By now, it's reached every inhabited system within 50 light-years. The council members stared at the display in shock. Then Hexara spoke in a voice filled with something that might have been panic. What have you done? The chaos in the council chamber grew with each passing moment. Cathara's thousands of bodies were moving independently for the first time in her species' history. Some danced to music only they could hear. Others sat quietly, apparently lost in private thoughts. The unity that had defined her people for millions of years was cracking like ice in the spring sun. Luxanar's energy form flickered between different colors and patterns. Instead of his usual steady golden glow, he now pulsed with blues and reds, and colors that had no names. I can feel separate thoughts forming, he said, his voice filled with wonder and terror. Each part of my consciousness is becoming individual. Vextar tried to maintain order but found his own thoughts fragmenting. Part of him wanted to stop this contamination immediately. Another part was curious about what it would be like to make a decision based on personal desire rather than species-wide consensus. A third part wondered what his favorite color might be, a concept that had never existed for his people before. "Captain Vasquez," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady, "explain what you have done to us." The human woman stood calmly in the center of the chaos, still holding her device. "We've introduced you to something your species gave up long ago in exchange for power and efficiency. We've shown you what it means to be individuals." Morden's crystalline body was making sounds it had never made before. Instead of the harmonious tones that all architects produced in perfect unison, he was creating his own unique resonance. "This is wrong," he said, but his voice carried uncertainty. "We achieved perfection by eliminating individual variation. We became powerful by thinking as one. And look what you built with that power," Captain Vasquez replied, gesturing at the massive station around them. "A civilization dedicated to forcing others to be like you. You conquered the galaxy by eliminating diversity, by making every species submit to your idea of order." She activated her device again and new images filled the chamber. These showed the conquered worlds of the Council's empire. Billions of beings living identical lives, following identical rules, thinking identical thoughts. It was perfect order, but there was something cold and lifeless about it. "Where is the art in your empire?" she asked. "Where is the music, the poetry, the dreams? Where are the individuals who dared to imagine something different?" Cathara's main cluster of bodies spoke, while thousands of others continued their chaotic dance. "Art is inefficient. Poetry serves no function. Dreams are. She paused, struggling with concepts her species had abandoned eons ago. "Dreams are wonderful," she finished, sounding surprised by her own words. The transmission from Captain Vasquez's device was growing stronger, and reports began flooding in from across the station. Council staff members were behaving strangely. Instead of performing their assigned duties in perfect coordination, they were asking questions, expressing preferences, making individual choices. "The contamination is spreading," reported Hexara, though her voice carried more fascination than fear. "Our own people are becoming infected with individuality." "It's not a contamination," Captain Vasquez said firmly. "It's a gift. We're giving back something your species lost when they chose unity over diversity." Vextar struggled to understand what was happening. His people had eliminated individual consciousness thousands of years ago because it led to conflict, inefficiency, and chaos. Every Zephyrian thought the same thoughts and made the same choices. It had made them incredibly powerful and successful. But now, as individual thoughts began forming in his mind, he realized what they had lost. The joy of personal discovery, the excitement of having a unique perspective, the satisfaction of making a choice that was truly his own. "This is dangerous," he said. But even as he spoke, he was enjoying the strange sensation of having a private thought. Individual consciousness leads to disagreement, conflict, war. Sometimes, Captain Vasquez admitted, but it also leads to growth, creativity, and love. "Yes, humans fight with each other. We disagree about almost everything. We've had wars and conflicts throughout our history. But we've also created beauty, discovered new truths, and learned to care for each other in ways that collective consciousness cannot." She showed them new images now. Humans helping strangers in disasters. Artists collaborating despite having different visions. Scientists debating theories and making breakthroughs through their arguments. Lovers choosing each other despite their differences. "Your unity is impressive," she continued, "but it's also sterile. You've created a galaxy where everyone thinks the same way, makes the same choices, lives the same life. That's not civilization. That's just a very large machine." Lix's tentacles were moving in patterns none of her species had ever used before. Each one seemed to be exploring independently, creating unique gestures and movements. "I can feel myself becoming more," she said slowly. "Not just part of the collective, but something separate and special." The communication systems crackled with reports from across council space. On the Zephyrian homeworld, citizens were painting pictures for the first time in millennia. On Cathara 9, individual hive members were refusing to follow pheromone commands and instead choosing their own activities. The Silicon architects were producing structures that were beautiful rather than merely functional. "Stop this," Vextar commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. Part of him was fascinated by the reports of his people rediscovering creativity and choice. Captain Vasquez shook her head. "I can't stop it now even if I wanted to. The transmission is quantum-locked and self-replicating. It's spreading through every communication network, every translation matrix, every consciousness link in the galaxy." She looked around at the 12 council members, each one struggling with the new sensations of individual thought. "Besides, why would you want me to stop it? For the first time in thousands of years, your people are truly alive." Morden's crystal body was now producing music instead of the usual harmonious drone. It was rough and untrained, but it was uniquely his. "This song," he said with wonder. "No other architect has ever made this sound. It belongs only to me." "That's what makes it beautiful," Captain Vasquez said. "Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours." The reports continued to flood in. Entire star systems were experiencing unprecedented chaos as beings who had never made individual choices suddenly found themselves faced with infinite possibilities. Some were adapting quickly, embracing their new freedom. Others were struggling, frightened by the responsibility of personal decision-making. "You're destroying the order we've spent millennia building," accused Hexara, though her crystalline form was now displaying colors that no member of her species had ever shown before. "We're not destroying it," Captain Vasquez replied. "We're transforming it. Order imposed from above is just another form of slavery. True civilization comes when individuals choose to work together, not because they have to, but because they want to." Cathara's voices were now speaking in different tones and rhythms. Some sang, others spoke poetry, others asked questions that had never been asked before. "What happens now?" she wondered. "If we are all individuals, how do we govern ourselves? How do we make decisions?" "The same way humans do," Captain Vasquez said. "Messily, slowly, with lots of arguments and mistakes, but also with creativity, innovation, and genuine cooperation. You'll learn to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility." Vextar felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty about the future. For thousands of years, every Zephyrian had known exactly what would happen next because they all thought the same way. Now, with individual consciousness returning, the future became unpredictable and therefore exciting. "You've given us chaos," he said, but there was no anger in his voice. "We've given you choice," Captain Vasquez corrected. "And choice is the most powerful force in the universe. It's what turns collections of matter into conscious beings. It's what turns conscious beings into individuals, and it's what turns individuals into true civilizations." The device in her hands pulsed one final time, and suddenly the transmission stopped. But the damage, or the gift, depending on perspective, had been done. Across the galaxy, trillions of beings were experiencing individual consciousness for the first time. "The process is complete," she announced. "Every thinking being in council space now has access to their own individual thoughts and the ability to make personal choices. What they do with that gift is up to them." Vextar looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. They were no longer the unified representatives of ancient collective civilizations. They had become something new, individuals struggling to understand their own thoughts and desires. "What have you made us?" he asked quietly. Captain Vasquez smiled. "We've made you human." The effects spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within 6 hours of Captain Vasquez's transmission, every major civilization in council space was reporting the same impossible phenomenon. Their people were becoming individuals. The communication channels buzzed with frantic reports. On Zephyr Prime, The planet-wide coordination network had collapsed as citizens began making personal choices instead of following collective directives. Military units were refusing orders not out of rebellion, but because soldiers were suddenly capable of questioning whether their missions were right or wrong. Commander Thexvol of the Zephyrian Third Fleet found himself staring at an order to destroy a small colony world that had stopped paying tribute. For 10,000 years he would have executed such an order without thought. Now he wondered about the families living on that world. He wondered if there might be another solution. He wondered if following orders was the same thing as doing what was right. For the first time in his life, he chose to disobey. Meanwhile, on Cathara 9, the great hive cities were transforming into something unprecedented. Individual hive members were breaking away from their assigned roles and pursuing activities that interested them personally. Some were creating art. Others were exploring the surface world their species had ignored for millennia. A few were simply sitting quietly, enjoying the novelty of private thoughts. The Hive Queen's secondary consciousness cluster watched in fascination as her children discovered freedom. Part of her was horrified by the breakdown of perfect efficiency. But another part, a part that was uniquely hers, was proud of their courage in choosing new paths. In the council chamber, the 12 representatives struggled to comprehend the scope of what was happening. Their ancient civilization, built on the foundation of collective consciousness and unified purpose, was crumbling in real time. "The reports are getting worse," announced Hexara, her crystalline form now displaying a constant rainbow of colors that shifted with her individual emotions. "The architect homeworld reports that their building projects have stopped. Instead of constructing identical structures, our people are creating art." She said the word like it was a disease, but there was wonder in her voice. Morden, the architect representative, was producing his own unique music with his crystal resonances. "I have seen the images of their creations," he admitted. "They are not functional. They serve no practical purpose, but they are beautiful." Vextar reviewed the incoming reports with growing amazement. "The pattern is consistent across all our territories. Beings who have never made individual choices are suddenly capable of independent thought and action. But the strangest part is..." He paused, struggling with concepts his species had no words for. Most of them seemed to be happy about it. Captain Vasquez had been standing quietly during these reports, but now she spoke. "That's because freedom feels good, even when it's scary. Your people have been living like machines for so long they'd forgotten what it meant to be alive." Luxonar's energy field flickered with patterns of confusion and excitement. "But without unity, how can we maintain our empire? How can we coordinate the activities of trillions of beings across thousands of worlds?" "Maybe you don't," Captain Vasquez replied simply. "Maybe instead of ruling over them, you learn to work with them. Maybe instead of demanding obedience, you inspire cooperation." Cathara's thousands of voices spoke in chaotic harmony. "You're suggesting we abandon everything we've built, the peace, the order, the efficiency." "I'm suggesting you build something better," the human captain said. "Yes, your old system was efficient, but it was also empty. You've created a galaxy full of living beings who might as well have been robots. Now they have the chance to become truly alive." The reports continued to flood in, and they painted a picture of unprecedented change. Some systems were adapting well to their new freedom. Others were struggling with chaos, as beings who had never disagreed about anything suddenly found themselves in conflict about everything. But even in the chaos, there were signs of hope. On Luxonar 7, energy beings who had shared a single collective consciousness for eons were discovering the joy of individual relationships. Some were forming partnerships based on personal attraction rather than assigned compatibility. Others were choosing solitude, enjoying the peace of private meditation. "Look at this report," said Lix, her tentacles moving in patterns that expressed her personal delight. "A group of young Zephyrians has formed what they call a band. They're making music together, but each one contributes their own unique sound." Vextar examined the data with interest. "The music they're creating is unpredictable. No computer could have calculated these harmonies. That's what makes it beautiful," Captain Vasquez explained. True art comes from the interaction between different, individual perspectives. It can't be programmed or calculated. It has to be felt and chosen. But not all the reports were positive. Several systems were experiencing violent conflicts, as newly individual beings struggled to resolve disagreements they'd never had to face before. Some groups were trying to forcibly restore the old collective consciousness. Others were embracing chaos and refusing any form of cooperation. The Mordak system is in complete disorder, reported Hexara. Without unified command, their population doesn't know how to distribute resources or maintain infrastructure. Vextar felt something he'd never experienced before: personal responsibility. As council speaker, he had always made decisions based on collective wisdom and established protocols. Now, faced with the breakdown of their entire civilization, he realized he had to choose what to do based on his own judgment. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. We could try to reverse the process, he said slowly, though part of him didn't want to. The station has reality warping technology. If we could eliminate the source of the transmission— The source is already gone, Captain Vasquez reminded him. My ship finished broadcasting hours ago. What you're seeing now is the natural result of beings discovering their own individual consciousness. You can't put that back in the box. Morden's crystal structure resonated with something that sounded like distress. Then our civilization will collapse. Chaos will consume everything we've built. Not everything, the human captain said gently. The good parts of what you built will survive. Your technology, your knowledge, your achievements, those don't depend on collective consciousness. They depend on intelligence and cooperation, which individuals can provide just as well as collectives. She gestured at the reports flowing across their screens. Look more carefully at what's happening. Yes, there's chaos and conflict, but there's also cooperation happening in ways your species never achieved before. Beings are choosing to help each other not because they're programmed to, but because they want to. Cathara's main cluster focused on a particularly interesting report. On Hive World 7, some of my children are forming voluntary work groups. They're maintaining the food systems not because they have to, but because they've chosen to take responsibility for feeding their communities. That's how human civilization works, Captain Vasquez explained. We don't force people to be doctors or teachers or farmers. They choose those roles because they want to help others, or because the work satisfies something inside them. Vextar was beginning to understand the full scope of what the humans had done. They hadn't just given his people individual consciousness. They'd given them the possibility of building something entirely new, a civilization based on choice rather than compulsion, on cooperation rather than control. But as he watched the reports of chaos spreading across the galaxy, he realized that possibility came with a terrible cost. Millions of beings were suffering as they struggled to adapt to freedom they'd never been prepared for, and then the alarm started ringing. Council speaker, came an urgent voice from the station's communication center. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Hegemony Central Command. They're demanding an immediate explanation for the breakdown of order across all council territories. Vextar felt his newly individual consciousness focus with crystal clarity. The Hegemony Central Command represented the military and administrative heart of their empire. If they decided the council had lost control, they would act to restore order through force. What are they saying? He asked. They're mobilizing the reality division, came the reply. They intend to use the Omega protocols to reset the consciousness of every being in council space back to their original collective state. The council chamber fell silent. The Omega protocols were the ultimate weapon of their civilization, technology that could literally rewrite the quantum foundations of consciousness itself. It had never been used on such a scale before, but theoretically it could force every individual mind back into collective unity. It would erase everything that had just been born, reducing trillions of newly free beings back to the status of sophisticated machines. Vextar looked at Captain Vasquez, who had gone very still. Can they do it? He asked. Probably, she said quietly. But it would be the greatest crime in galactic history. They'd be murdering the individual consciousness of every being in known space. Cathara's voices rose in distress. They would kill the part of us that has just been born. The Hegemony Central Command's fleet appeared at the edge of Council space like a swarm of metallic death. 300 ships, each one capable of destroying entire solar systems, moved in perfect formation toward the Council station. At their center was the Omega device, a massive construct that could rewrite the fundamental structure of consciousness itself. Admiral Kexthul of the Reality Division stood on his flagship's bridge. His Zephyrian features set in the same expression of cold determination that his species had worn for 10,000 years. Unlike the chaos spreading through the rest of their civilization, the military had maintained strict collective discipline. They were immune to the human contamination through isolation protocols and mental shielding. "Begin charging the Omega device," he commanded. His voice carried the absolute certainty of a being who had never questioned an order or felt doubt about a decision. In the council chamber, alarms continued to wail as the fleet approached. The 12 representatives faced their first real test as individuals, a choice between preserving their new freedom and saving their civilization from military coup. "They'll arrive in 30 minutes, reported Hexara, her crystalline form, now pulsing with colors that reflected genuine fear. "The Omega device will need 15 minutes to achieve full power after arrival." Vextar felt the weight of individual decision-making pressing down on him like a physical force. As Council ET Speaker, he could order the station's defenses to stand down and allow the Reality Division to proceed with their plans. It would restore order, eliminate the chaos, and return their civilization to its previous state of efficient unity. It would also destroy the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced, the knowledge that his thoughts were his own. "What would your people do in this situation?" he asked Captain Vasquez. The human woman looked small and fragile, surrounded by the towering alien beings, but her voice carried absolute conviction. "We'd fight. Not because we thought we could win, but because freedom is worth dying for." Cathara's thousands of voices spoke as one, but now each carried its own tone and emotion. "Fight? But we are not warriors. We are administrators, diplomats, scholars. The Reality Division has the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. You have something more powerful than weapons," Captain Vasquez said. She pulled out her communication device, not the one that had carried the consciousness virus, but a simple transmitter. "You have the most dangerous force in the universe, free will." Before anyone could stop her, she activated the device and began broadcasting on all frequencies across Council space. Her voice reached every system, every world, every individual who had just discovered their own consciousness. "My name is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earthship Defiance," she began. "For the past 8 hours, you have experienced something your species gave up long ago. You've remembered what it means to think your own thoughts, make your own choices, and be truly alive. Across the galaxy, billions of beings stopped what they were doing to listen. Now the old powers want to take that away from you," she continued. "They want to force you back into collective unconsciousness, to make you into machines again. They're calling it restoring order. I call it murder." In the council chamber, Vextar tried to reach for the communication controls to stop her transmission, but found himself frozen. Part of him wanted to maintain diplomatic relations with the Reality Division, but a larger part, his individual part, wanted to hear what she had to say. "I can't make this choice for you," Captain Vasquez continued. "That's not how freedom works. But I can ask you one question. What do you choose?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across council space, beings who had spent their entire lives following orders began making personal choices. On military worlds, soldiers laid down their weapons rather than participate in the forced erasure of consciousness. On administrative planets, bureaucrats began broadcasting messages of support for the newly individualized populations. Most importantly, on the industrial worlds that powered the hegemony's war machine, workers simply stopped working. Not in organized rebellion, but in millions of individual decisions that they would rather face punishment than help destroy the freedom they had just discovered. Admiral Kexthul watched these developments with growing alarm. "The contamination is spreading even to our shielded facilities," he reported to Hegemony Command. Individual consciousness appears to be naturally contagious when beings are exposed to the concept. Then proceed immediately, came the reply. Use the Omega device now before the infection becomes irreversible. The Admiral gave the order, and the massive reality-warping weapon began to charge. Space itself started to distort around the device as it prepared to rewrite the quantum foundations of consciousness across an entire galaxy. But something unexpected happened. On thousands of worlds, newly individual beings began making the same choice simultaneously. Not because they were programmed to, but because they each personally decided it was right. They began broadcasting their own thoughts and experiences, sharing what freedom felt like, spreading the contagion of individual consciousness even faster. Quantum effect of trillions of beings exercising free will at the same moment created a resonance cascade that nobody had predicted. The universe itself seemed to respond to the collective act of choosing freedom, and reality became more flexible, more alive, more responsive to conscious intention. In the council chamber, the 12 representatives felt the wave of quantum resonance wash over them. For a moment, they experienced not just their own individual consciousness, but a sense of connection to every other free mind in the galaxy. Not the old collective unity, but something new, a voluntary network of individuals who chose to share their experiences while maintaining their unique perspectives. Magnificent, whispered Luxanar, his energy form now blazing with colors that had never existed before. We are each separate, but we are also connected, not by force, but by choice. The Omega device, designed to impose rigid order on consciousness, encountered something it had never been built to handle, the chaotic but unbreakable power of freely chosen connection. The device tried to rewrite the quantum structure of individual minds but found that consciousness backed by genuine choice was fundamentally different from the mechanistic, collective awareness it was designed to manipulate. Overloaded by the quantum resonance of trillions of free minds, the Omega device began to malfunction. Its reality-warping field collapsed in on itself, creating a cascade failure that spread through the entire hegemony fleet. Admiral Kexathul felt his mental shields failing as the concept of individual choice reached even his protected consciousness. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning an order. For the first time in his species' recent history, he wondered if there might be a better way. He looked at the chaos spreading through his fleet as soldiers discovered their own capacity for independent thought and made a choice that would have been impossible minutes before. He ordered the fleet to stand down. 6 months later, the galaxy was a very different place. The Galactic Hegemony Council had dissolved, replaced by thousands of smaller governments, as species rediscovered the diversity of thought and governance that individual consciousness made possible. Some systems struggled with chaos and conflict as newly free beings learned to negotiate their differences. Others flourished with innovations and artistic achievements that collective consciousness could never have produced. Captain Vasquez stood on the observation deck of her ship, now permanently stationed near what had once been the council headquarters. The massive station had been converted into a cultural exchange center where beings from across the galaxy came to learn about the art of individual choice and cooperative freedom. Vextar joined her at the viewing window. His appearance had changed. Over the months, instead of the uniform clothing of his collective past, he now wore colors and styles that he personally found beautiful. More importantly, his eyes held the spark of genuine curiosity that comes only from individual consciousness. "Do you ever regret what you did?" he asked. Captain Vasquez considered the question seriously. The galaxy was messier now, less efficient, more chaotic. There had been conflicts and struggles that the old system would have prevented through enforced unity, but there had also been breakthroughs in science, explosions of artistic creativity, and the formation of genuine friendships and love relationships between beings who chose each other rather than being assigned to work together. "No," she said finally. "Humanity has always believed that freedom is worth the risk of chaos. A galaxy of individuals making their own choices will sometimes make mistakes, but it will also accomplish things that no collective consciousness could ever imagine." She pointed to a section of space where former hive worlds were now experimenting with voluntary cooperation, creating structures of incredible beauty that served no function other than to express the joy of individual creativity, working in harmony. Besides, she added with a smile, what's the point of being alive if you're not free to choose your own path? Vextar nodded, understanding flooding through his individual consciousness. The humans had given the galaxy something far more valuable than technology or weapons or territory.